Sleepy Joe. What else do I have to say? Pretty much nothing. The man opens his mouth and I make videos about it. You guys already know the drill. This man is not ready for office, and every single time he leaves the basement, he proves that exact statement. He is borderline geriatric. So we got a whole bunch of Joe Biden topics to talk about for this video. We're gonna start off with this whole SCOTUS pick fiasco that's been ravaging the globe lately. I gotta highlight Joe Biden's absolute hypocrisy, which of course isn't surprising considering, frankly, the entire Democrat Party has done a complete 180 since 2016, Joe Biden included, of course. We gotta cover some of the gaffes because, of course, the man's left the basement and we got like 2 or 3 of them. And then we gotta talk about an interesting poll. So like usual, it's another day with Joe Biden out of the basement, and I'm gonna fill you guys in on everything that's happened so far. Now, before we get into any of it, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell to be notified every single time I post a new video, since that's by far the best thing you can do to support the channel. Follow me on Twitter and check out my Subscribe Star. Links are both in the description. Now with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. Alright, so let's start off with the fun stuff, or maybe the light-hearted stuff. Well, I mean, it depends on what perspective you're looking at this from. Some may say it's pretty sad. And you know what? Maybe I agree with that notion. But regardless of whether or not it's sad, the man is running for the presidency of the United States of America. And regardless of whether or not it's sad, you need to know about it. You need to see exactly what's going on behind the man's noggin. And so, of course, he recently had a speech, and this is what happened.
And perhaps, most cruelly of all, if Donald Trump has his way, the complications from which are well beyond what they should be. It's estimated that 200 million people have died, probably by the time I finish this talk.
So Biden says 200 million people will lose their lives due to the COVID pandemic at the end of the speech. Now, of course, what Biden meant to say was 200,000, considering right now as I'm recording the video, it's at 199, the total count. But this isn't just an honest mistake. There is an issue here. Joe Biden cannot get numbers straight. It is a clear sign of his cognitive inability, or some may say his cognitive disability. And if you don't believe me, just look at this.
Out of $1,600,000,000,000 worth, $1,400,000,000,000 out of $1,400,000,000, $740 billion over 10 years. Billions of gallons of gasoline. I mean, billions of $2.3 billion worth of, $500 billion in savings.
He cannot get the numbers straight. There's something wrong. There is something seriously, seriously wrong. You're talking about the guy who's going to be doing tax reform, the guy who's supposed to be balancing the books, the guy who's supposed to be negotiating trade deals. He can't even get the numbers right. How does that make any sense? Quick answer, it doesn't. But in a certain way, it does make sense, because when have Democrats ever really cared about balancing the books anyways? But look, people argue that this is elder abuse. I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but should Joe Biden be pushed out onto the podium? Should he be thrusted into this position? I know he wants to be there. Of course, he's been trying to run for office, or trying to run for the highest office, the presidency, for decades now, basically since like the 1980s, and he's failed every single time, and maybe it's on his bucket list. But man, from an ethical perspective, from the Democrat perspective, what they're doing, is it wrong? The man keeps taking days off. He can barely string 2 events together, let alone campaign days. Like I stated the other day, he can barely string 2 sentences together. And very recently, he was so out of breath that he could barely speak or stand at the podium. Look at the video.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the nation's Constitution Center. I had the great privilege of being the guest leader of this outfit for a year. It's an appropriate place to make the speech I'm about to make.
This guy is struggling. He's potentially in trouble. It may not just be mental or cognitive decline. He may be in decline in a more general sense, and he said many times he's going to be a transitional candidate. The most that he could do is 4 years, and 4 years, if that. The current rate that we're seeing his decline go, who knows how long he's actually going to be able to last. But let's not harp on that for too long, because of course, you guys have seen it. It's obvious. It's been out in the open for months now. Let's talk about this whole SCOTUS fiasco, and of course, the hypocrisy, frankly, on both both sides. I mean, Mitch McConnell is not absolutely clean in terms of his hypocrisy, but at the end of the day, Mitch McConnell is also not the president. And what he did in 2016 doesn't mean that all of a sudden all of the Democrats are trying to throw out the Constitution and stop the president from getting his pick. But here we go again. Joe Biden coming out and saying the same thing that all of the Democrats have been saying, from Obama to the lowly intern in a local congressional race, that the president should not be given his constitutional right to appoint a SCOTUS pick. And here is the irony. Let me paint the picture for you. Joe, who just gave that speech that we covered earlier in the U.S. Constitutional Center, completely disregarding and disrespecting the Constitution. Listen to what he had to say.
But if I win this election, President Trump's nominee should be withdrawn. And as a new president, I should be the one who nominates Justice Ginsburg's successor.
So what he argued there is that the president, even if he does make his pick, it should be revoked, and him in 2021 should be the only one who could replace Justice Ginsburg. First of all, Joe, don't get ahead of yourself. I know the polls are telling you that you're going to win, but I have a hard time believing that you will. But this just goes to show you exactly where the Democrats are. They're in such a state of perpetual outrage and self-righteous indignation, they are willing to step all over the Constitution, the most sacred document in American history, just to get their way. They want to expand the court. They want to impeach the president to stop him from getting a pick. You even have Michael Moore urging Pelosi to shut down government to stop the pick. Right here, Michael Moore urges Pelosi to shut down government to block GOP from filling Ginsburg's seat. And then you have a literal presidential candidate arguing for a very similar thing. But what these people don't seem to understand is that, I just said people, the people elected the president largely because they wanted him to put strong justices into the Supreme Court who respect the Constitution. And so to have a speech in the Constitutional Center and say what Joe said there should be a very rude awakening for, frankly, every American that loves their country and respects the Constitution. I know I've said Constitution a lot, but it's important. And so Joe has proven himself throughout his political tenure to sell out American interest, disrespect the Constitution, and lack clear transparency to who he is, what he stands for, and what his policies are. And that's the segue to get to the next part. The president has been very honest, giving you every single name that he is considering to put on that high court, even going as far as naming Tom Cotton, as controversial as that may be. Where Joe Biden, in fact, we've seen him how many times just avoid questions, like just recently at that same event.
May God protect our troops, and may God bless Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Thank you so much.
Walks off the stage. But it's not just avoiding questions. Of course, that contrast is important, the fact that the president takes any question and answers honestly pretty much every single time. But not only does Joe avoid taking questions and not give the American people the transparency that they so deserve in seeing who they would be voting for, but he's also on multiple occasions refused to go into his plans or go into what his intentions are because he doesn't want to stir up controversy. And now he's doing the exact same thing with his SCOTUS pick, where he said this.
Anyone put on a list like that under these circumstances will be subject to unrelenting political attacks, because any nominee I would select would not get a hearing until 2021 at the earliest. She would endure those attacks for months on end without being able to defend herself.
Publicly and officially stating, I'm not going to name my SCOTUS pick because I don't want that person to be scrutinized, essentially. Most likely because he'd pick someone quite far left and would be censured on that quite heavily by the Republicans and, of course, the American voters. And he said basically the exact same thing when questioned about his tax plan. He started going into it and he said, oh, I don't want to get into my tax plan because they'll kill me. This just goes to show exactly who he is. And the American people are seeing it, probably most starkly in Florida with the Latino vote, who have soundly, almost unanimously rejected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris within certain Latino communities. Of course, the Venezuelans and the Cubans. We saw one specific study that showed that 90+% of Venezuelans were supporting the Republican Party. Like I stated, close to a unanimous condemnation of the Democrats, and by virtue, Joe Biden. Well, look at this poll right here. New York Times, more than 60% of Latinos reject progressives' identity politics. And this takes me to an anecdote. I have a friend who's from California. He's Latino. Latino, and he openly told me straight up, he said, I cannot stand this whole Latinx movement. I'm not Latinx. I'm South American. I'm just a regular American who happens to have ancestry from Mexico. And this whole putting people in a box, this whole Latinx thing, frankly, I've seen nothing but a rejection of this type of politics. Of course, anecdotal, but I'm sure you guys have similar stories. And so the trend continues, and Joe Biden seems to just sink more and more, deeper and deeper every single week. And regardless of what the polls are stating, regardless of what the people are saying, the man is in clear decline, both physically, mentally, and in terms of his numbers in polling and enthusiasm. Not to mention, he's a crony politician with a track record of contradicting himself endlessly.